G'day, it's James Greenshields from www.ptsdrecovery.tv. Hope you're all well. I've been asked to comment a bit on complex PTSD. Well, it brings up a bit of a topic that I'd like to have a look at, and that is, why do people, two people see the same event, one will get traumatised and one won't? Well, one might be affected in some way, but it'll dissipate over a couple of days, whilst the other person will go on and develop full-blown PTSD. What I like to explain this is in the way of realistically a spectrum of effect that trauma can cause on an individual.
Okay, so let's have a look at the spectrum. Now, as I mentioned, that two people can be standing and watching the same event, and one can be traumatised and one may have no effect or minimal effect. So what we call the spectrum on the left-hand side is where a person can see an event or witness or go through a situation, and realistically there's no dominant effect or lasting effect within their mind and therefore their body, etc. However, what might occur is a person witnesses an event and they get what's called an adjustment disorder. Is when the mind recalibrates for a period of time. They go through a number of symptoms like a bit of sleepless couple of nights, a few nightmares, and possibly they need to take a bit of time off work. This generally, however, will abate over the following days or even weeks. And so they'll find that whilst initially they felt a bit of trauma, it's left the system and they've gone back to the way they were before. However, what can occur is that the mind doesn't actually recalibrate to the way it was. And the best explanation I can give you is like you're travelling down a highway and all of a sudden you see in front of you the bridge has been destroyed in front of you. Now the police will come out and they'll put in a detour sign. So what would happen is that you find a detour or another route to go on your way, and it will bring you back on the highway some way down the track. Well, with an adjustment disorder, you have within your mind, I should say, you have these neural pathways, neural highways, and they're just like that highway I was talking about. And then the trauma comes in and all of a sudden the bridge is blown out, or your brain recalibrates to deal with the situation. So a detour or an alternate pathway, a neural pathway within your mind is actually calibrated. Now, an adjustment disorder, the bridge is rebuilt within a few days or a week or two, and the highway is reopened. However, with post-traumatic stress, the onset of post-traumatic stress disorder, what occurs is the bridge is totally gone. It's not going to be rebuilt right now. And the detour becomes a more permanent fixture within the mind. The neural pathways are not the same. So the recovery process is all about clearing away the debris, rebuilding the bridge and getting the main highways flowing again. So the onset of post-traumatic stress means that your mind has recalibrated. The different systems within your mind, including the limbic region you might be aware of, and a number of other physiological things will happen to you that anyone suffering knows as well. So that's the onset of post-traumatic stress. And then we get into what's called complex PTSD, and that's where a whole sequence of traumas have occurred and a person has realistically a spaghetti, and I'll talk about that in a minute, a spaghetti effect of intertangled trauma, and there's a lot of emotional debris, cognitive debris as well that's within the person. Now the big thing to remember though is what can happen over a period of time if someone's suffering this is other conditions can come on. Now I've previously talked about the onset of depression and borderline personality disorder coming to people that suffer post-traumatic stress for a period of time. Another one is chronic fatigue syndrome. So the big thing is if you've been treated for these ailments or conditions and if nothing's happening, not getting better, and you know deep inside yourself that you've been traumatized before, then the first step is to talk to the person, your therapist or your counsellor or whoever you're dealing with, and say, could this be an issue? And really get it to be brought to the surface. And generally what will be found is that yes, the trauma needs to be reconciled. You need to heal your wounds that have been come on because of your trauma before the other conditions will normalise, and your physiology and your cognitive abilities will normalise. So let's now have a look at complex PTSD in more detail.
So that's the spectrum, but what is complex PTSD? Well, PTSD, as you're probably aware, or post-traumatic stress disorder, came as a diagnosis out of a lot of great scientists and practitioners trying to get an understanding of what the effects of the Vietnam era was, out of the Vietnam veteran. So realistically, PTSD as a diagnosis came about in the mid-80s, and you must understand that there is no globally agreed definition of what post-traumatic stress disorder is. The National Institute of Mental Health in the United States refers to it as an anxiety disorder suffered by some who experience a traumatic event. Well, there's quite a few holes in that, as anyone listening that is either a supporter or a sufferer will know, and that is quite regularly it's not just one traumatic event. Sometimes you may witness a series and you're not too sure when it all comes together and when it becomes post-traumatic stress. Or you might not have actually even witnessed a life-threatening situation, but you may be exhibiting PTSD symptoms after a situation has occurred to you, possibly over a prolonged period of time, where life as you knew it was going to end. A great example of this is workplace harassment. There have been quite a few documented cases of PTSD symptoms coming out of people that have been under prolonged workplace harassment, or even domestic violence is another great example where it might not have been life-threatening, however, life as they knew it was going to fall apart. The other thing is, quite regularly, the supporter will develop PTSD symptoms after supporting, for a period of time, someone with PTSD. Now, it's a very individual reason as to why they go across. Sometimes, because of PTSD, the sufferer becomes violent, that supporter will suffer themselves domestic violence, etc. But remembering also that quite regularly that's a spouse of someone that they're witnessing suffer dramatically. Their life is totally changing. Life as they know it is falling apart. So often they can suffer either depression or post-traumatic stress symptoms because of the situations that they are in. So it's very complicated exactly what is PTSD, how it comes about. It's very individual. But in about 2009, people realised that there was degrees of post-traumatic stress, and someone who'd been in an abusive relationship for an extended period of time or had suffered child abuse for an extended period of time may have a whole sequence of situations and events that realistically built up and combined to this really tangled spaghetti within them that develop what's known as complex PTSD. The thing is, a lot of people will turn around and say, I have complex PTSD so I can't get better. That's not true at all. That's not true at all. What's happening is the recovery process still needs to occur, but it will be more in detail, more in depth that will have to go on. And unlike someone who possibly has just one incident, your recovery process will be quite detailed and quite extensive. So the whole thing that I keep talking about, how someone needs to recover through releasing the emotional bucket and then changing the perspective on how they view the situation, needs to occur, but that's going to be over a more prolonged period. So the first step that I can suggest for anyone who suffers post-traumatic stress is to get onto that punching bag and release the anger, and then go into the sadness and go into the fear. And what I'll do is I'll put together a little video on how to get into the fear and release that, and I'll put that out in the next couple of weeks for you to look at. So I trust that that's been valuable. Remember, you can recover. You've just got to take ownership of the situation you're in. Once you do that, that's the biggest step. And that means that you can then start making those little progressive steps to get better, get better, get better. Start with the anger. Let me know how you go. Trust it's been worth it. Catch you later.